Rain lashed against the windshield in sheets, each drop blurring the world outside into streaks of gray and black. The wipers squeaked a dull rhythm, the only sound cutting through the static hum of the car's old radio. It was supposed to be a harmless night drive, just a few friends killing time before heading home. The road wound deeper into the woods, twisting like it didn't want to end. A sign flashed past in the beam of the headlights. Hollow Creek, population 312. They laughed, small-town horror movie vibes, someone joked. But the laughter didn't linger long. By the time they saw the house, the storm was in full rage. It stood half-hidden behind a row of crooked oaks, their branches bending and snapping under the wind. The building was a silhouette of decay, 2 stories tall, the windows boarded from inside, its roof sagging like an exhausted creature. Someone said it looked abandoned. Someone else said it didn't feel that way. The air smelled of rain and rust and something faintly sweet, like rotting apples. Inside, the air felt heavier, thick, unmoving, damp. Their flashlights flickered across wallpaper that peeled like shedding skin, and old furniture draped in dusty white sheets. The house groaned with every gust outside. Somewhere deep within, a door slammed shut, though no one had touched it. Could have been wind. They told themselves it was. But then came that sound, soft at first, rhythmic, deliberate. A knock. 3 knocks. Then silence. They froze, flashlights trembling in their hands. The knocking came again, closer this time, from the far hallway. One of them, Daniel, tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked halfway through. "It's probably just the wind," he said, though his words didn't sound like he believed them. The knocking continued, steady, patient. It didn't echo like wood. It sounded hollow, as if it were coming from inside the walls. They followed the sound, one step at a time. The floorboards moaned under their weight, each creak louder than the last. The knocking led them upstairs, to a narrow hallway lined with portraits. Faces long gone, eyes still watching. The rhythm never changed. Knock, 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 then silence again. When they reached the end of the hallway, the air turned cold enough to mist their breath. Daniel reached for the attic door, hand shaking, his flashlight barely holding. The handle was icy. As he twisted it, the knocking stopped. Complete stillness filled the house. They all stood frozen in the dark. Then, from behind them, 3 knocks echoed, from the floor below. They turned. The staircase loomed in shadow. Someone whispered they should leave. But Daniel, breathing hard, said he just wanted to see what was up there. He climbed first, the others close behind. The air in the attic smelled of wet wood and something old, metallic. The beam of light swept across broken furniture, boxes, and a rocking chair that was moving, back and forth. Slowly, the knocking returned, but now it wasn't from the walls. It was from beneath the floorboards, right under their feet. Each knock vibrated through the wood, shaking dust loose from the rafters. Daniel crouched, pressing his ear to the ground. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "It's coming from below." Then he went silent. The others backed away, hearts pounding, every instinct screaming to run. The rocking chair stopped midsway. Then, slowly, it began again, this time without rhythm. As if someone invisible had sat down. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out. In the dark, they heard breathing that wasn't theirs. Faint, wet gasp. When the lights came back on, the attic was empty. No one behind them, no sound except the storm. But on the wall nearest the stairs, something had been carved into the wood. Freshly, a set of 3 words, uneven and deep. "I heard you." They didn't speak on the way back to the car. The knocking didn't follow, but it didn't need to. It was already in their heads. A sound that didn't stop, even after they drove away, even after the rain cleared and the night went still. Years later, the narrator sits in front of a microphone, the static of that same radio whispering low in the background. "Every house," he says quietly, "has a memory. Some just remember too much." He pauses, glancing over his shoulder, as if waiting to hear something. A faint knock answers from somewhere off mic. 3 times. Steady. Familiar. He swallows hard, but keeps recording. And sometimes, he adds, voice trembling now. They never forget the ones who listened. The static fades. The knocking continues. Distant, rhythmic, echoing into the next story. The old farmhouse stood at the edge of a winding gravel road, wrapped in fog and silence. Emily stepped out of the car first, the crunch of gravel under her boots sharp in the still air. The place looked older than she'd expected. Its white paint now a tired gray, windows clouded by decades of dust, the porch sagging like it had forgotten what it meant to welcome anyone. Her husband, Thomas, joined her, his usual excitement dulled by the chill that clung to the air. They had saved for this, dreamed of owning something of their own. Yet standing there, staring at the crooked silhouette of the house, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that it was staring back. The realtor had called it a quaint country home with a tragic history. The widow who once lived here lost her husband under unclear circumstances. A fall? A sickness? Maybe something else. The records didn't say. She never left after his death, not even when the neighbors stopped visiting. When she finally passed, no one claimed the property for years. Emily thought it was just small-town superstition, a local ghost story meant to keep kids away. They spent the first evening unpacking boxes and brushing off cobwebs. Thomas laughed at the creaks and groans of the old wood, calling it the house settling. Emily smiled but didn't respond. Something about those sounds felt intentional, almost conversational. When the wind brushed past the window, it didn't sound like wind at all. It sounded like whispering. That night, they slept in the master bedroom upstairs, the same room the widow had once used. Emily woke to the sound of footsteps above them, slow, dragging steps pacing across the attic. She nudged Thomas, but he only stirred and rolled over. The footsteps stopped. Then came a soft thump, like something falling. Silence followed, deep and heavy. Emily lay awake until morning, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The days passed quietly. Thomas worked on repairs, replacing boards, fixing the front steps, restoring the small greenhouse behind the house. Emily spent her time inside, cleaning out the rooms. She found small things tucked into corners. A hand mirror, a half-burned candle, a comb with strands of white hair tangled in its teeth. Each discovery felt like intruding on someone's private grief. One evening, while Thomas was in town picking up supplies, Emily wandered upstairs with a lantern. The light flickered softly against the faded wallpaper, revealing shapes that looked almost like handprints. She followed them to the end of the hallway, where a narrow door stood slightly ajar. Behind it, a set of stairs wound up into the attic. She hesitated, then climbed. The attic was filled with the smell of dust and lavender. Old furniture sat covered in sheets, their shapes ghost-like in the dim light. Against one wall stood a wooden rocking chair. It moved gently, though the air was still. Emily froze, the lantern trembling in her hand. She tried to convince herself she was imagining it. Then she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. A soft, broken sob. It came from the corner of the attic, behind a stack of boxes. Emily stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello!" The sobbing stopped. For a heartbeat, the silence felt alive. Then something answered her. Not with words, but with a long, low sigh that came from directly behind her. She spun around, the lantern's light cutting through the dark. The rocking chair was still now, but on the floor beneath it lay a folded piece of paper. Her name was written on it. Hands shaking, she picked it up and unfolded the yellowed page. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned. The message was short, written in black ink that had bled slightly with time. "You shouldn't have come back." Emily stumbled backward, the lantern flickering wildly. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She dropped the paper and ran down the stairs, nearly tripping as she burst into the hallway. When Thomas returned home later, he found her sitting on the floor, pale and trembling. She told him what happened, but he brushed it off, saying the mind plays tricks in old houses. That night, she dreamed of the widow, sitting in that same rocking chair, her face hidden by a veil. The sound of sobbing filled the dream, endless and hollow. When Emily woke, The letter lay beside her pillow again, the ink fresh, the paper warm. But now, beneath the original message, something new had been written in shaky handwriting. You promised you'd stay. Thomas searched the attic the next morning, insisting it was some prank or coincidence. But there was nothing up there. No drafts, no papers, no sign anyone else had been in the house. Yet every night after that, Emily heard the sobbing again, always around the same time. It grew louder each night, closer. On the 7th night, she followed it. Lantern in hand, she climbed the stairs again, every creak of the wood echoing through the stillness. When she reached the attic, the chair was empty, but the air felt heavy, charged. The window creaked open slightly, and the scent of lavender filled the room. She stepped forward and saw something carved into the wooden beam near the window. It was a date, the year 1874, and below it, a name, Emily. Her breath caught. The handwriting was identical to her own. Downstairs, Thomas called her name, his voice distant, muffled. She turned toward the stairs, and for a moment, she swore she saw a woman's silhouette standing in the doorway, head tilted, veil flowing, eyes hollow with grief. The lantern went out. When it flickered back to life, the room was empty again, save for the rocking chair moving slowly on its own. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping the farmhouse in silence. The house itself seemed to sigh, as if settling after being disturbed. In the flicker of the lantern, the carved name gleamed faintly in the dark, a whisper from another time, another life. Somewhere in the shadows, a voice murmured low, almost tender, "Welcome home." The desert had a way of swallowing sound. By the time the photographer's car rolled onto the dirt road, even the hum of the engine felt like it was being absorbed into the emptiness. Miles of cracked earth stretched on both sides, shimmering under the last burn of the setting sun. He glanced at his phone, no signal, no messages, no updates. Just the pulsing dot on his GPS pointing toward a place called the Red Hollow Retreat. It wasn't much more than an Airbnb listing with 2 grainy photos. A small one-story house, flat-roofed, lonely, standing in a desert that looked endless. The host's message had been brief. Keys under the mat. Enjoy the quiet. Quiet. That was what he wanted. After a year of sleepless nights, deadlines, and city noise, the desert promised peace. He parked in front of the house just as the sun slipped below the horizon. The air changed immediately, still, dry, electric. Dust drifted through the dying light like ash. The house looked smaller than he imagined, built from old timber and sun-bleached stone. The front door creaked open before he even touched it. Inside, the temperature dropped. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain that would never come. He walked through each room, noting the sparse decor. A couch, a table, a bed. A few framed photos of desert flowers, all slightly tilted on the walls. No TV, no Wi-Fi, no clocks. Just silence, thick and alive. The only light came from the moon through the windows, bright enough to carve shadows across the floor. He found the guest book on the kitchen counter, names, dates, small notes from travelers passing through. Most thanked the host for solitude, for the stillness of the place. But one entry, scribbled near the bottom of a page, stood out. Don't stay the second night. The house doesn't like that. He brushed it off as a joke, closed the book, and unpacked his camera gear. The desert sky outside was brilliant, endless black scattered with cold stars. He set up his tripod by the window and began taking long exposures, capturing the faint outlines of mountains and the orange glow of a distant storm. The shutter clicked in rhythm, steady, almost comforting. Sometime after midnight, he heard a soft noise, the distinct creak of a floorboard. He froze, eyes shifting toward the darkened hallway. The sound came again, slow, deliberate. He called out, thinking maybe the host had arrived late. No response. He turned on the light, but the bulb flickered once and went out. The silence after was unbearable. His heartbeat filled the room, loud in his ears. Then, faintly, a second sound joined it, breathing. Slow, steady, just behind the thin wooden wall. He pressed his ear to it, half expecting to hear wind. But it wasn't wind. It was too human. He stepped back, his pulse racing, and grabbed his phone. No service. He tried the front door, but it resisted, not locked, just heavy, as if someone was holding it from the other side. He pulled harder. The door swung open suddenly, nearly throwing him off balance. The desert stretched before him, silent and endless. Nothing moved. No wind, no animals, no sound. The air was so dry it burned his throat. He left the door slightly open and sat down on the couch, trying to calm himself. Hours passed in that strange, half-awake state where time loses shape. The moonlight shifted, crawling across the floor. When his eyes opened again, the faintest glow of dawn was rising outside. He stood and stretched, relief washing through him. But when he glanced at the guest book again, something was different. A new entry had been added. The ink still glistened, the handwriting messy, hurried. Checked in, his name. Checked out, tomorrow. His breath caught. He hadn't written that. His camera still sat by the window untouched. The photographs from last night blinked on the display, image after image of the same horizon except the last one. In that photo, someone stood outside the window. A figure, blurred but unmistakably there. He turned toward the window. Nothing, only the desert. But as he looked closer, he noticed something strange. Faint footprints leading from the edge of the sand straight to the house, stopping just beneath the window where he'd been shooting. The sun climbed higher, yet the shadows inside the house refused to move. He could feel them thicker, heavier than before. He packed his equipment fast, stuffing everything into his bag. As he turned toward the door, he froze again. The door, still slightly ajar, was now shut. And from the other side, he heard it, the slow drag of bare feet on wood. He backed away, his mind spinning. Maybe there was someone living here. Maybe the host wasn't who he said he was. But when he called out, his voice sounded swallowed, muted by the thick air. The house seemed to breathe with him, inhale when he did, exhale when he stopped. He made for the back window, tried to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. The glass was cold despite the desert heat. His reflection wavered faintly in the pane, and for a second, he thought he saw another face behind his own. A man, standing just over his shoulder, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. He spun around. No one there. Only the empty living room, glowing faintly with dawn. The floorboards beneath his feet creaked once, then fell silent again. The air tasted like dust and copper. He walked back to the guest book, desperate to find some clue, something that made sense. But the book was gone. In its place lay a single Polaroid photo. He lifted it carefully. It showed the living room exactly as it was now, except there was a figure in it, standing where he stood, holding the same photograph. He felt his throat tighten, panic threatening to take over. The walls seemed closer now, the air thicker. He grabbed his bag and bolted for the door, forcing it open with his shoulder. The desert hit him like a wave of dry heat. He didn't stop running until the house was a distant speck behind him. When he finally reached the highway, his car waiting like a lifeline, he turned for one last look. The house stood perfectly still, small against the horizon. But the front door was open again, swaying gently in the wind, if it was wind at all. He drove without stopping, the morning sun rising over the endless sand. Hours later, when he pulled into the nearest gas station, he opened his camera again, desperate to delete the photos. But the memory card was empty, every image gone, except for one. The final shot was of the desert road at sunrise, his car in the distance, and behind it, faint but visible, the house, closer than it should have been, like it had followed him there. He deleted the image, turned off the camera, and promised himself he'd never go back. But sometimes, late at night, when he looks through the lens to frame a shot, he swears he can see that same horizon. That same house. Waiting. He always said the house smelled like time. Not dust or wood or polish, time itself. That strange scent of old photographs, warm air, and faded perfume. Every summer from 1979 to 1983, his parents dropped him off at his grandmother's Victorian home on the edge of town. A creaking monument of another century. He loved her, of course. Her soft hands, her quiet voice, the way she hummed hymns while baking bread. But even as a child, He knew something about that house wasn't right. Felt too awake. It was 3 stories tall, wrapped in ivy and shadows. The hallways were lined with clocks. Not matching, not even synchronized, but always ticking. Hundreds of small clicks echoing through every room, blending into an uneasy rhythm that seemed to follow him wherever he went. His grandmother told him they helped her keep track of time, but she could never say which one was correct. "They all tell different truths," she used to whisper. The boy's favorite room was the parlor. In the daytime, sunlight poured through the tall stained glass windows, scattering soft colors across the old rug. But once the sun dipped, those same colors turned cold. Blue and violet shadows stretching over the furniture like reaching hands. That was when he'd start hearing it. The faint creak of a floorboard, the sound of something shifting just beyond the doorway. One night, while his grandmother slept, he decided to follow the noise. Barefoot, he crept down the hall, past the tall mirror that always seemed to shimmer when he passed it. The house was so still that his heartbeat sounded loud. The floor beneath him was cold, like the warmth had been drained from it. Then he heard a whisper, light, breathy, almost curious. "Come play." He stopped. The voice came from the basement door, the one he was never allowed to open. He told himself it was imagination, his mind echoing his own thoughts in the dark. But when he turned to leave, the doorknob rattled, once, twice, as if something on the other side wanted out. He ran back to his room and hid under the blanket until morning. The next day, when he asked his grandmother about the basement, she froze. The color drained from her face, and her eyes, soft moments ago, hardened. "That door stays shut," she said quietly. "Some memories don't like to be disturbed." He didn't ask again, but the house didn't forget. Over the next weeks, the voice came back. Sometimes in the middle of the day, sometimes when the clocks all went silent at once. It was never angry, never threatening, just persistent, like a lonely child calling from the dark. He started to talk back, whispering when no one was around. It became a secret friendship, one he didn't fully understand. Then one evening the power went out. The house sank into thick darkness, and the ticking of the clocks stopped completely. The silence was so absolute it felt physical. He lit a candle and moved toward the parlor. As the flame flickered, the tall mirror caught his reflection, but something was off. The figure in the glass wasn't moving like he was. It stood perfectly still, eyes darker, mouth closed tight. He reached toward the glass, heart thundering. The reflection smiled. The candle went out. He screamed, and the lights came back on instantly. His grandmother rushed in, holding a lantern, her expression unreadable. He tried to tell her what he saw, but she only said, "The house remembers faces." Then she locked the parlor door and told him never to enter again. The summers passed and he grew older. He stopped believing in ghosts, stopped listening for whispers. Life moved on. He went to college, got a job, built a life. For decades, he didn't think about the house. Until the day his mother called to tell him grandma had passed away and left the property to him. He returned for the first time in 30 years. The ivy had withered, but the clock still ticked. The same smell, time, dust, and faint perfume hung in the air. Everything looked smaller, quieter. He walked through each room, memories rising like ghosts from the floorboards. When he reached the parlor, the door was unlocked. Inside, the mirror stood exactly where he remembered it, untouched by time. Dust coated everything except the glass, which gleamed faintly in the gray light. He approached slowly, half expecting to see the boy he used to be staring back. Instead, the reflection showed the room as it was, empty. Then, as he turned to leave, he noticed a photograph on the piano. It was old, color faded to sepia. His grandmother sat in her chair, smiling faintly, and beside her stood a boy. Not him, but close enough to make his stomach twist. The same hair, the same eyes. He looked closer and realized the boy's hand was resting on the shoulder of another figure. Faint, almost transparent. A second child, blurred, with eyes that seemed to stare straight through him. He felt dizzy, the air pressing against his chest. The ticking of the clocks grew louder, overlapping into chaos. He stumbled back toward the hallway, and that's when he heard it again, that same soft whisper, older now, rougher. "You came back." He froze. The voice was behind him, close enough to feel the air move. He turned, slowly, heart hammering, and saw his reflection in the mirror once more. Only this time it wasn't mirroring him. The reflection stood perfectly still, head tilted slightly to one side. Then it raised its hand and pressed its palm to the glass. He felt the cold instantly, like ice burning his skin. He tried to pull away, but his hand wouldn't move. The glass rippled like water, and for a brief, impossible second, he saw something on the other side. A dimly lit basement, walls lined with old toys, the faint sound of a clock ticking in reverse. When he finally tore his hand free, he stumbled backward, gasping. The mirror was still now, his reflection normal again. Except for one thing, the faint outline of a second figure behind him, just barely visible, its hand still pressed to the glass. He turned quickly, but the parlor was empty. Only dust, silence, and the smell of time. He left that night, locking the door behind him. But before he drove away, he glanced back at the house. Through the upper window, a faint light flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw a small boy standing there, watching him leave. Days later, when he developed the photographs he took of the house, he found one that made his heart stop. A picture of the parlor, the same mirror, the same light. But in the reflection, there were two boys standing side by side. One smiling, the other not. The house was supposed to be a simple project, a restoration job, not a haunting. The architect told himself that more than once as he parked in front of the mansion for the first time. The heavy iron gate closing behind him with a metallic groan that sounded almost like a sigh. The client had been vague in his instructions. Preserve what you can. Redesign what must change. Keep the house's integrity intact. That last part stuck with him. Integrity. It was an odd word to use for a structure so far gone. Its roof half collapsed, windows opaque with dust, walls bowed under their own age. He entered through the side door, the hinges crying out as though they hadn't moved in decades. The light from his flashlight crawled over the walls. Intricate carvings buried under layers of grime. Faded murals depicting forests and figures that seemed to move when the light passed over them. He couldn't explain it, but the air felt wrong. Not cold, not even musty. Just off. Like the walls were listening. He set up his drafting table in what used to be the main hall, spreading out his sketches. As he began tracing the floor plan, he noticed odd measurements. Spaces that didn't align, hallways that extended beyond the exterior dimensions. He brushed it off as age, shifting foundations, architectural quirks of a forgotten style. But that night, while working late, he heard footsteps echoing from the floor above him. Slow, steady, pacing. The sound was too deliberate to be rodents or loose boards. He climbed the grand staircase, his flashlight trembling in his hand, and found only empty rooms, dust swirling in his wake. Yet, the creaking continued, always just one floor above wherever he went. He called out once, his voice swallowed by the silence. No answer. He left soon after, convincing himself fatigue was twisting his senses. Over the following weeks, he returned daily. The mansion grew familiar, almost comforting in its solitude. He redrew the plans again and again, each version slightly different. Sometimes he'd find an extra doorway where there hadn't been one before, or a hallway that stretched farther than his measurements allowed. Each time, he adjusted his drawings to match what he saw. But when he reviewed them later, the proportions made no sense. Entire sections of the house shouldn't physically exist. One evening, he brought his assistant, Lydia, to help document the layout. She noticed it too. "This corridor wasn't here yesterday," she said quietly, pointing at a narrow passage branching off the east wing. It led to a single wooden door with an iron handle, cool to the touch despite the summer heat. The architect tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "Maybe it's sealed," Lydia suggested. He nodded, but he felt the handle pulse faintly under his hand, like something breathing on the other side. That night, he dreamed of blueprints. Endless sheets of paper spreading across the floor, hallways folding into themselves like origami, rooms spiraling downward into blackness. He woke drenched in sweat, the smell of sawdust and rot still in his nose. He returned the next morning, determined to prove it was all logical, structural, explainable. Yet as he stepped inside, he realized the light came from the wrong direction. The sun should have been shining through the eastern windows, but the shadows stretched west. He opened his notebook to the previous day's sketches. The layout had changed again. The front door now connected to a different room entirely. He laughed nervously, but the sound died quickly. The laughter didn't echo. It was absorbed, like the house was swallowing his voice. By late afternoon, Lydia hadn't shown up. He assumed she was running late, until he saw her car still parked outside. He called her name. No answer. Her phone sat on the drafting table, buzzing faintly with missed calls. He checked every room, shouting until his throat burned. Finally, from somewhere deep in the house, he heard a faint reply. A whisper. It wasn't her voice. He followed it. The sound came from the locked door in the east wing. This time the handle turned easily. The hinges groaned as he opened it. The room beyond was small and bare, the walls covered in faint, half-erased sketches. At the center stood Lydia's drafting board, set up exactly like his own. On it lay a blueprint, but not of this house. It was of his apartment, his office, his studio. Each room was labeled meticulously, every detail perfect. But one addition caught his eye, a new section marked Extension Project, in progress. He traced it with his finger, heart pounding. It led to a room labeled only basement. He didn't have a basement. A soft creak sounded behind him. He turned, expecting to see Lydia, but the hallway beyond the door was gone. In its place was another room, identical to the one he stood in. The same walls, the same drawings, the same drafting board, except this one had his own notes scattered across it. His handwriting, his initials. The floor trembled slightly, and he felt a vibration through the soles of his shoes, like a heartbeat pulsing through the structure. He stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of papers. When they fell, the top sheet flipped over, revealing a hand-drawn cross-section of the mansion. It showed multiple floors, but not stacked vertically, spiraling inward deeper and deeper without end. At the very center, a single black square labeled Core. The air thickened. His flashlight flickered. From somewhere beneath him came a low rumble, the sound of wood bending, stretching. He rushed back toward where the door had been, but now there was only solid wall. No seam, no handle, no escape. The drawings around him began to shift, lines redrawing themselves in real time, ink bleeding outward like veins. He grabbed his pen, desperate to make sense of it. Every line he drew appeared instantly on the walls around him, glowing faintly, reshaping corridors, carving new rooms. The realization hit him like ice. The house was following his designs, or worse, he was following its. He dropped the pen and stumbled backward into the darkness. The light dimmed until only his shallow breaths filled the void. Then, out of the silence, a voice whispered low, familiar, female. "Keep building." He turned, searching, but saw only shadows rippling like water across the walls. The sound of pencil on paper began again, but his hands weren't moving. He watched in horror as the blueprints on the table drew themselves, floor by floor, each labeled with precision. The newest edition bore his address. His chest tightened, panic rising. He screamed, tearing the pages apart, scattering them across the room. The walls trembled violently, the floorboards groaning in protest. He bolted toward the faint outline of a doorway and emerged outside, gasping, sunlight blinding his eyes. The mansion behind him stood perfectly still, calm as if nothing had happened. His papers fluttered around him in the dirt. One page landed face up near his foot. It was the latest blueprint. His apartment again. But this time, a note was scrawled across the bottom in neat cursive. Project approved. Begin interior work immediately. He looked up at the windows. For a moment, he thought he saw movement. The faint shape of a woman at the drafting table, her hand sketching something unseen. He turned and ran, leaving the house behind, the sound of distant pencil scratches fading with every step. That night, back in his apartment, he tried to sleep. But the sound of something dragging across paper woke him. He turned on the light and froze. His drafting table was open. A new blueprint spread across it, freshly drawn, still wet with ink. The title read, Architect's Residence, Second Phase. He stared at the page in disbelief. The drawing showed his apartment, with a new door he'd never seen before, right where his bedroom wall should be. As he stared, he heard it, the faint creak of hinges opening. And from the darkness beyond the wall, the whisper returned. Keep building. The house was quiet the day they moved in. Too quiet, for a place that had been empty only a week before. The real estate agent had promised them it was a great deal, a classic property with history, she'd said, smiling too much, avoiding their eyes when they asked why the price was so low. But they were newlyweds, young, tired of city noise, and the house had charm. Tall ceilings, wide porches, a view of the forest that stretched endlessly behind it. They signed the papers without hesitation. On the first morning, Emily woke before dawn. The house was still, the light outside pale and soft. She rolled over to find Mark already awake, staring at the ceiling. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. She listened. Faintly, somewhere below them, a slow, rhythmic thump echoed through the floorboards. A heartbeat. Then it stopped. They told themselves it was the plumbing, the wind, the old wood settling. But as the days passed, the noises didn't fade. They multiplied. Footsteps on the stairs, soft humming near the attic, the creak of a door closing when no one was there. Mark tried to dismiss it, but Emily could see how pale he'd grown, how his eyes darted toward the corners of rooms as if expecting to see someone there. By the third week, strange things began happening in the photographs. Every morning, Emily developed the film from her old camera. She loved documenting their new life, the garden, the sunsets, the way the house glowed in evening light. But in the photos, faint shapes appeared. Sometimes just shadows, sometimes outlines of people, blurred, watching from the windows, always in the same places. She showed them to Mark, but he waved it off. "Light tricks," he said. Yet, the next night, he took a photo himself, and the figure appeared again. This time, clearer. A woman standing just behind him, her face turned away. They began avoiding certain rooms. The basement, where the air felt heavy and wet, and the upstairs hallway, where the wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips that seemed to form shapes when the light hit them right. One night, after a storm, they found muddy footprints leading from the front door to the second floor. Small prints, barefoot. They followed them up the staircase, step by step, until they stopped outside the nursery. The nursery had been empty since the day they moved in. They didn't have children, but now the door was open. Inside, the rocking chair they'd found in the attic was moving slowly, back and forth, the floor beneath it groaning with each motion. Emily froze in the doorway, her breath shallow. "Mark," she whispered, "please tell me you see that." He nodded, his face drained of color. He stepped forward, grabbing the chair to stop it, but the instant he touched it, the motion stopped mid-swing, unnaturally still. The silence afterward felt suffocating. Then came a faint giggle, light and distant, echoing through the walls. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The sound of something moving through the house, faint footsteps, a soft hum, like a lullaby, kept her awake. She turned toward Mark, but his side of the bed was empty. She found him in the hallway, staring at the nursery door again. "She's singing," he said quietly. "Can't you hear her?" Emily strained her ears. For a moment, she thought she could. A gentle tune, slow and melodic, coming from behind the door. She reached out to touch Mark's arm, but his skin was ice cold. His eyes never left the door. "She wants me to come in," he whispered. Emily pulled him away, dragging him back to their room, slamming the door shut behind them. They packed the next morning, too terrified to stay another night. But when they stepped outside, the forest looked different. The trees pressed closer, the path to the car half swallowed by mist. The house behind them seemed larger than before, its windows dark and watching. They drove into town and checked into a motel. But even there, Emily couldn't escape the feeling of being followed. That evening, as she unpacked her bag, a photograph fell to the floor. She didn't remember packing it. It was the last photo she'd taken before they left the house. The nursery door half open, the rocking chair visible inside. But now, in the photo, a woman stood beside it, holding the hand of a small child. Her hands shook as she showed it to Mark. "This isn't possible," she whispered. He didn't answer. His gaze was locked on the background of the image, the window. In the reflection, their own car could be seen in the driveway. And sitting in the back seat, just barely visible through the glass, was a faint outline of a face. A child's face. That night, the motel room door rattled softly, once, twice. Mark got up, looked through the peephole, nothing. He turned away, exhaling shakily. The door rattled again. Harder this time. Emily sat up, clutching the blanket. When she looked toward the window, she saw it. A small handprint pressed against the glass from the outside. They didn't sleep at all. At sunrise, they drove straight to a nearby diner, desperate for light, for people. Emily scrolled through her phone, searching for information about the property. Buried in old archives, she found a newspaper clipping from 1967. Mother and child found dead in country home fire. The address was the same. The article said the fire started in the nursery. No remains were ever found. Mark went silent. He stood up and walked out without a word, heading to the car. Emily followed moments later, but he was gone. The car sat empty, the engine still running. His phone lay on the seat, the same photo open on the screen, the one from the nursery. Only now the image had changed. The woman and child were gone. The rocking chair was empty again. Emily stared at the picture, her chest tightening. Then she noticed something new, the reflection in the window. Two figures standing side by side outside the house. One looked exactly like her, the other like Mark. Both smiling, both holding hands with the woman. The phone buzzed suddenly in her hand. An unknown number. She answered, her voice shaking. A whisper came through the line. A child's voice, soft and echoing. "Come home." The line went dead. Emily didn't move for a long time. The morning sun rose behind her, bright and gold. But when she finally looked up at the rearview mirror, she saw something that made her blood freeze. In the back seat, just for a moment, she saw a reflection. A little girl sitting quietly, smiling at her. She turned around. The seat was empty. But when she looked again at the mirror, there were now two reflections, the girl and Mark. Both sitting in the back seat, both staring straight ahead. Emily dropped the phone, slammed her foot on the gas and sped away. The road stretched endlessly, the forest swallowing the world on both sides. She didn't stop until she reached the highway, shaking, tears streaking down her face. When she finally dared to glance at the mirror again, both reflections were gone. But as she exhaled, relieved, the radio crackled to life. The static grew louder until a faint, familiar lullaby began to play, the same one from the nursery. And through the static, a small voice whispered one last time, "Welcome home." They found the house by accident. A detour through the mountains, a wrong turn on a fog-drenched road, and suddenly the headlights caught the outline of something colossal rising from the trees. An abandoned inn, or what was left of it. The sign out front swung in the wind, half-rotted, its letters faded beyond recognition. "We should turn around," Jenna said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. But the fog was thick, the rain heavy, and her brother, Cole, insisted they wait it out. "It's shelter," he said. "What's the worst that could happen?" The worst began the moment they stepped inside. The air was heavy and stale, thick with the scent of old wood and mildew. The flashlight beams danced over torn wallpaper and broken furniture. A reception desk layered with dust. Behind it, the key rack still hung on the wall, half the hooks occupied, the tags so old the numbers had faded. The storm outside howled through shattered windows, and the rain against the roof sounded like a heartbeat that never slowed. They set up in what used to be the lobby, spreading their blankets near the cold fireplace. Cole tried to make a joke about it, free lodging. But Jenna didn't laugh. The place felt wrong, like someone had just left. The air wasn't cold enough for a place that had supposedly been empty for years. And somewhere above them, a floorboard creaked. Once, twice, then silence. They tried to ignore it, talking softly to fill the emptiness. But as the night deepened, the sounds returned. Footsteps pacing along the upper hallway, doors opening and closing in sequence. It wasn't wind. It was deliberate, measured, human. Cole grabbed his flashlight and started up the staircase, ignoring Jenna's whispered pleas to stop. "If someone's here, I just want to know," he said. She followed, heart pounding, the old steps groaning beneath them. The hallway stretched endlessly, the wallpaper torn in long vertical lines that looked like claw marks. Each door they passed bore a number plate, 201, 203, 205. Every odd number, every other door missing entirely. Halfway down the hall, Cole stopped. His light flickered across something at the far end. A door slightly open, a faint golden glow spilling from within. The air smelled faintly of candle wax. "Someone's there," Jenna whispered. He nodded. They approached slowly, the silence pressing in around them. Cole pushed the door open. Inside, a single candle burned on a nightstand beside an unmade bed. The rest of the room was empty, except for the mirror on the far wall. It wasn't cracked or dusty like the others. It gleamed, impossibly clean, reflecting the room perfectly. Then Jenna noticed something wrong. Their reflection didn't move right. In the mirror, Cole's hand was still reaching for the door, frozen mid-motion. Jenna's mirrored self stared straight ahead, eyes wide, unblinking. Cole stepped closer, confusion on his face. "What the hell?" His reflection suddenly smiled. Slowly, wrongly, the mirrored version of Jenna turned her head toward him, though Jenna herself hadn't moved. The candle flickered violently, and the room went dark. Jenna screamed. When she turned, Cole was gone. The mirror now showed only her reflection, and the faint outline of another person standing behind her. She spun around, flashlight trembling. Nothing, just the stale room and the smell of burnt wax. She stumbled backward, crashing into the nightstand. The candle hit the floor, snuffing out. She ran into the hall, shouting his name, but every door she passed was now closed. The numbers were different, repeating, looping 205, 205, 205. The hall stretched endlessly in both directions. Her flashlight beam weakened, sputtering as if the air itself was draining the light. Somewhere ahead, she heard his voice. "Jenna?" It was faint, distant, echoing through the walls. She ran toward it, panting, until she reached another open doorway. The room beyond was identical to the last. Same candle, same bed, same mirror. And there he was. Cole stood in front of the mirror, staring blankly at his reflection. She ran to him, grabbing his arm. "We have to go," she pleaded. But when he turned to face her, his eyes were hollow, lifeless. He smiled that same wrong smile from the mirror. "Stay," he whispered. "It's almost time for check-in." She backed away, trembling, her voice cracking. "Cole, please." The mirror behind him rippled like water. A pale hand reached out, resting gently on his shoulder. Then another, then another. Before Jenna could scream, they pulled him backward, through the glass, without a sound. The surface smoothed instantly, leaving no trace of him at all. Jenna's flashlight flickered out. The dark was total. She stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold, and crawled into the hallway. The air was freezing now, her breath visible in pale clouds. The only light came from the far end, the lobby. She sprinted, her footsteps echoing too loudly, the sound chasing her like something alive. When she burst into the main room, everything was different. The blankets, their bags, even the fireplace were gone. The front door stood wide open, rain pouring in, but beyond it wasn't the forest. It was the same hallway from upstairs, stretching into infinity. The number 205, repeated on every door. Jenna screamed and bolted toward the nearest one, throwing it open. Inside was the mirror room again, the bed, the candle, and now, Cole, sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling faintly. His eyes were empty, his skin pale. "I told you," he said softly. They needed another guest. The candle's flame rose higher, twisting unnaturally. Shadows crawled across the walls, taking human shape. Figures emerged one by one. Guests in old-fashioned clothing, their faces blurred, their movements jerky, mechanical. They surrounded her silently. Jenna backed against the wall, trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "I just want to leave." A voice spoke from behind her. Calm, polite, almost warm. "No one ever leaves before checkout, Mississippi." She turned slowly. The man standing there wore a tattered uniform, a bellhop's outfit, the name tag tarnished and unreadable. His face was half-rotted, one eye clouded with decay. He smiled gently. "Welcome to your stay." Before she could react, the figures stepped forward as one. The candle extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. When the lights returned, the next morning, the next decade, who could tell, the inn was silent again. Only one new key hung on the rack behind the desk. The tag was old, brass, engraved with the number 207. Travelers passing through the mountain road sometimes say they see lights through the fog, flickering faintly in the windows. A soft glow, like candles burning behind the glass. And if you listen closely, they say, you can hear laughter echoing from within. A woman's voice, calling a name that no one remembers anymore. The man had lived alone for most of his life. A quiet writer in his late 40s, he had always preferred solitude. Long nights spent with his typewriter, the click-clack of keys echoing softly in the silence. When his publisher suggested he rent a secluded home for inspiration, he found the perfect listing almost immediately. A restored farmhouse deep in the countryside, surrounded by acres of mist-covered fields. A place with a past, the ad said. He didn't care about that. All he wanted was peace, space, and silence. The landlord met him at dusk, a thin man with watery eyes, polite enough but oddly reluctant to speak. When asked about the house's history, he simply said, "It's been empty for a long time. The last tenant left unexpectedly." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "You may hear things. The walls shift in the wind." The writer smiled politely. He didn't believe in haunted houses. But that first night, as he unpacked his things and settled into the small study overlooking the fields, he noticed something strange. The air inside felt heavy, almost charged, as if it was listening. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. At midnight, he started typing, the rhythmic clatter filling the space. The words flowed easily at first, paragraphs forming out of nowhere. A story about a man trapped in an old house, haunted not by ghosts but by his own imagination. But when he stopped to reread what he'd written, his fingers froze. The story wasn't what he remembered typing. The sentences were the same structure, but the words had changed. It described him, his name, his past, the very room he was sitting in. The last line made his chest tighten. He doesn't know he's not alone. He sat back, staring at the page. Maybe it was fatigue, a trick of his own mind. He deleted the passage and went to bed. But when he woke in the morning, the words were back, printed neatly on the page again, as if he'd never erased them. That day, he tried to ignore it. He explored the house, taking note of its strange design. Narrow hallways, oddly angled rooms, a cellar door that wouldn't open no matter how hard he pulled. The entire place felt subtly off balance, like it had been rearranged too many times. And everywhere he went, he could hear faint sounds. A low hum, a whisper under the floorboards, the sigh of something moving just out of sight. By the third night, sleep was impossible. The tapping began, slow, methodical, coming from inside the walls. At first, he thought it was rodents. But when he pressed his ear to the plaster, he could make out a rhythm. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. Then 3 again. It was deliberate, a pattern. A language. He wrote it down, fascinated. Every night, the tapping changed. The pauses grew shorter, the rhythm more urgent. It was as if the house was trying to talk. One night, half out of exhaustion and curiosity, he tapped back, mimicking the rhythm exactly. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was thick and endless. Then, after a moment, came a reply from the floor beneath him. He jumped to his feet, heart racing, staring down at the old wooden boards. Something beneath was knocking back. Over the next days, the communication continued. He began transcribing the patterns in his journal, convinced he was uncovering something ancient, a code of some kind. The more he responded, the louder it became. Not just knocking now, voices, faint at first, then clearer. Sometimes a woman's whisper, sometimes a child's laughter. He started losing track of time, sleeping in short bursts, the words pouring from his typewriter as if someone else were dictating them. The story he was writing no longer felt like fiction. It detailed his every movement, when he ate, when he slept, when he sat staring at the locked cellar door. And the ending, though unfinished, terrified him. It said, "He finally opens the door, and what waits below knows his name." He tried to leave, packed his bags, drove for hours through the fog-choked roads. But somehow he ended up back at the same long dirt driveway, the farmhouse looming through the mist exactly as he'd left it. His car engine died as soon as he reached the gate. The lights in the house flickered on by themselves. That night, the typewriter started on its own. The keys clattered violently, faster than any human could type. He watched, frozen, as the paper filled line after line. The message repeated again and again. "Let us out." He tore the page free, but another began instantly. Then another. Dozens of pages, all the same phrase. He screamed, slamming the typewriter to the floor, but the clacking didn't stop. It was coming from every room now, walls, floors, even the ceiling. An orchestra of pounding, desperate noise. Driven by panic, he ran to the cellar door. The knocking was loudest there. He pulled, pushed, threw his weight against it until the hinges snapped. The door swung open. Cold air poured out, thick and heavy, smelling of dirt and rust. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. He held his lantern high, calling out, "Who's there?" No answer. Just the sound of the typewriter upstairs still hammering. Faster. Frantic. He descended slowly, the wooden steps groaning beneath him. The cellar was small, carved into the earth, the air so cold his breath turned white. Against the far wall stood an old mirror, taller than him, its surface blackened with age. He approached, the light flickering across the glass, and froze. Something moved behind it. It wasn't his reflection. It was someone else. A figure standing just out of view, pressed against the other side of the glass. His hand reached out, fingers long and thin, pressing from within. The glass rippled, like the surface of a pond. He stumbled back, heart pounding, as a faint whisper came from the mirror. His own voice. "Let me out." The lantern flickered violently, shadows stretching across the walls. He turned to run, but the staircase was gone, replaced by solid stone. He pounded the wall, shouting, but the sound was swallowed instantly. The mirror behind him began to tremble, a deep hum vibrating through the floor. The voice came again, this time layered, dozens of voices, all whispering the same words. "Let us out." The surface of the mirror cracked, then shattered outward. A gust of freezing air knocked him to the ground. He scrambled backward as dark shapes poured from the frame. Figures made of shadow and ash, their faces shifting like smoke. They surrounded him, whispering in unison. He screamed until his throat burned. Then suddenly the sound stopped. The cellar was silent. The figures gone. Only the mirror remained, perfectly whole again, its surface smooth, reflecting the empty room. The next morning, the landlord arrived to check on the property. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows. On the desk in the study sat the typewriter, a fresh sheet of paper still inside. The last line read, "He finally opens the door, and what waits below knows his name." The landlord frowned. He turned toward the mirror across the room, the same mirror from the cellar, now standing in the corner where it hadn't been before. For a brief moment, As the morning light passed over the glass, he thought he saw something move within. A man's face, staring back at him. He blinked, and it was gone. The house remains empty to this day. Locals say if you walk past after midnight, you can still hear the faint sound of typing from inside. The endless echo of a story that won't end, told by a man who never left. It was supposed to be a group getaway. 6 college friends meeting after years apart, hoping to relive a fragment of youth before their adult lives swallowed them whole. The house they rented sat at the edge of a lake in Oregon, surrounded by pine forest so dense it swallowed the horizon. Locals called it Hollow Creek House, though no creek flowed anywhere near it. It was beautiful in a way that felt unnatural. Still too perfect, as if the forest around it held its breath. They arrived at dusk, laughter echoing through the trees as they unloaded the car. There was Tom, the jokester who never seemed to take life seriously. Lena, quiet and observant, who had organized the trip. Darren, who carried his camera everywhere. Sisters Amy and Brooke, inseparable since childhood. And Nate, the one who had never really gotten over Lena. Their bond was familiar yet strained. Years of distance had thinned it, leaving awkward silences where friendship used to live. Inside, the house was rustic and grand. Polished wood floors, a massive stone fireplace, walls lined with dusty books. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, covered in cobwebs that shimmered faintly in the light. There was something oddly theatrical about the place, like it had been staged for a memory that had never happened. That first night, they drank and told old stories. Darren filmed everything, joking about turning it into a documentary. 6 friends. 1 creepy cabin. What could go wrong? He laughed, panning the camera toward the dark hallway. The others laughed too, but the mood shifted subtly when Lena frowned. "Hey, did anyone close that door?" she asked, pointing to the end of the hall. The door had been open earlier, now it stood shut. No one had. They brushed it off as nerves and too much wine. But when they went to bed, each of them heard something strange. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside their rooms. Brooke whispered to Amy that she thought she'd seen someone standing near the window, just beyond the curtain. A figure tall and thin, watching. Morning came bright and calm, though none of them had slept well. Darren found muddy footprints in the living room, large, barefoot, leading from the front door to the center of the rug, and then stopping abruptly. No exit prints. The group tried to rationalize it. Maybe an animal, maybe a prank. But the prints were human. Lena suggested leaving, but Tom teased her. "You always said you wanted a real ghost story," so they stayed. By afternoon, the mood lightened again. They swam in the lake, grilled food, took photos. But Darren seemed distracted. That night, he pulled Lena aside. "You'll think I'm crazy," he said quietly. "But when I looked through the footage from last night, there's someone in the background." He showed her the clip, a shot of Tom telling a story by the fire. In the dark reflection of the window behind him, a figure could be seen standing just inside the doorway, pale and still. It wasn't any of them. The reflection blinked. They replayed it over and over. The figure was gone when they checked the doorway, but from then on, none of them could shake the feeling of being watched. The next few nights grew progressively worse. Doors opened on their own. Objects moved. Brooke started sleepwalking, always toward the same place. The basement door, which they found bolted shut. Each time, she whispered the same phrase, "It's not done." On the 4th night, Darren set up cameras throughout the house. He placed one in the basement hallway, where the temperature always felt colder. At exactly 3:12 a.m., every camera flickered. When they checked the footage the next morning, what they saw made their stomachs turn. The hallway camera had captured movement. The basement door had slowly, quietly unlatched itself. From the darkness below, something crawled out. A shape on all fours, pale and skeletal, dragging its limbs like they didn't belong to it. It stopped halfway up the stairs and turned its head toward the lens. The face was smooth, featureless, like wet clay. Then it smiled. The video cut out. They tried to leave that morning, but the car wouldn't start. Phones had no signal. The lake, calm the day before, now seemed darker, almost viscous. Every sound, the rustle of wind, the creak of the house, felt alive. That night, Brooke vanished. One moment she was sitting near the fire, staring blankly into the flames, and the next she was gone. They searched the entire house, calling her name, their voices trembling. Then they found the basement door open. Darren wanted to call for help, but Tom grabbed a flashlight and started down the steps. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, the floor was wet, not with water, but with something thick and dark. Tom swung the light around, and for a split second, they saw Brooke standing in the corner, her back to them. "Brooke," he whispered. She turned. Her eyes were black, her skin pale and glistening, like it had been drained of color. She smiled, the same empty, stretched grin from the video. And then she whispered, "It's done." The lights went out. Screams filled the basement. Chaos, confusion, the sound of something dragging across the floor. When the flashlights flickered back on, Brooke was gone again, and Tom was standing completely still, his eyes wide, whispering the same phrase over and over. "It's done. It's done. It's done." By morning, only 3 of them remained: Lena, Darren, and Amy. They found Tom sitting by the lake, unresponsive, staring into the water. When they tried to pull him away, he started laughing softly, a hollow sound that didn't sound like him at all. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and walked straight into the lake. The surface rippled once, twice, and then went still. Lena and Darren grabbed Amy and ran. They didn't stop until they reached the main road, miles away, where a passing truck finally found them. When police searched the house, they found no sign of the others, no Brooke, no Tom. The basement door had been nailed shut from the inside. Months later, Darren reviewed the footage one last time before deleting it. In the final clip, recorded just before the power failed, he saw the reflection of the group in the window, 6 people, just as they had been when they arrived. But as the camera moved closer, he realized something. The 6th figure, the one standing between Brooke and Lena, wasn't any of them. It was smiling. Locals say the Hollow Creek house still stands, untouched. Teenagers dare each other to go there, claiming that sometimes you can still hear laughter echoing from inside, and see 6 shadows moving through the windows, one more than there should be. Years later, the Hollow Creek house burned to the ground. No one knew how the fire started. Some said lightning, others claimed they saw figures inside the windows just before the flames rose. When investigators sifted through the ashes, they found something that shouldn't have survived the heat. A single camera, half melted, but the memory card intact. The footage was only a few seconds long. A static-filled image of 6 people standing in the dark, their faces barely visible. Then, slowly, one by one, they turned to look directly at the lens. A whisper followed, faint but clear, "It's not done." The screen went black. The case was closed as unexplained. But every few years, someone driving past the ruins swears they see the faint glow of a fire flickering among the trees, and hear distant laughter carried on the wind. The voiceover fades into a haunting silence, the rain still whispering against unseen windows. A slow piano melody begins, low, distant, mournful. The narrator's tone softens, carrying the weight of everything heard before. "Maybe haunted houses aren't really about ghosts," the voice says quietly. "Maybe they're about what's left behind. The memories, the regrets, the echoes of people who never let go." The imagery shifts. Empty halls, flickering candles, dust dancing in moonlight. Each frame lingers a second too long, pulling the listener into reflection. A door creaks open softly, revealing only darkness beyond. "Some houses remember," the voice continues, "and if you listen long enough, you'll hear them remembering you." The music swells, a blend of sorrow and awe, before fading into silence, leaving the audience with chills, the sense that maybe, somewhere close, something unseen is still watching, still waiting.